We are in the middle of our class, the Beta Satan, that we've been going through. This is week 8. To catch you up, if you missed the first 7 weeks, I'm going to do my best, okay? I'm going to wrap up 7 weeks in 3 minutes, all right? The idea here is that the word offense is the Greek word scandalon, which we get the English word scandal from, and it literally means a trap, but not just any trap. It's the part of the trap where the bait sits on. And that what the devil wants to do is he wants to use offense in your life in order to trap you and keep you in prison from living in the freedom that God wants you to live in. I was talking to a friend today, and as we were talking, I was just realizing something I've already been realizing over the last 7 weeks, which is the reality that offense rules our lives in many ways. We all struggle with offense. We all have to deal with offense. How many of you were offended today by someone? How many of you were not offended today, but you had to deal with someone who has offended you in the past, and you realize when dealing with them that you haven't quite fully released them from everything in their life? Okay. You know, the more I realize this, just the more frequent I realize how often I am offended by people. People say things to me, I get offended. And one of the things that is most powerful is to own when you are offended, to realize what it is. You know, we cover it up with lots of different words. Oh, this person hurt me. This person rejected me. This person stabbed me in the back. This person treated me poorly. This person is just stupid. That person has issues. They're trifling. They're difficult to deal with. They are dysfunctional. They had bad parenting. It's a struggle when it's your own kid and you realize you're the bad parent, but sometimes you know that's the case. But whatever it is, it's like you deal with a person and you come up with all these different terms, but the reality is, no, you're just offended. That's what it is. And the great comedy of life is that it's usually people we have to deal with on an ongoing basis. Brothers or sisters, parents, children, co-workers, people we grew up with or people we have to associate and deal with on a regular basis. And they come back around in our lives and we realize once again, man, I'm still a little bit offended by something they did, by something they said, by how they treated me, by how they cheated on me or how they hurt me. And it just goes on and on and on again. It is very common in marriages that one offense becomes another offense, and before you realize it, it's like cancer in a relationship, and you just can't stand that person anymore. And some of you have been in this relationship. Some of you know others that have been in this relationship where you just look at the other person you're in a relationship with and you think, there's not a single thing I like about you. I don't know why I ever married you. I don't know why I ever went out with you. I don't know why I ever dealt with you. I don't know what attracted me to you in the first place. When I look back at my own life, I was a moron. I was an idiot. I don't know what I was thinking. And people feel that way. And whenever people sit down with me and they start talking and that's how they feel, I can promise you at the root of it is offense. And the thing we all want to deal with is the people who have offended us. Like, Pastor, can you tell me how to deal with the people who have offended me? And I'm getting there. It's a slow journey. And but we have one last thing to deal with. And my son got in the car from football practice, my 11-year-old, yesterday, and he was all mad. And the last 4 or 5 plays at practice, the quarterback didn't throw him the ball. And he was so discouraged and disappointed. He goes, all he wants to do is throw to this one person. And I just thought to myself, here's a young man who is offended. He was offended. And he allowed that offense to control his attitude, his perspective, his demeanor. He was mad at me, right? Like he was treating me bad, like I was the quarterback. And I had to remind him, there's only one thing we can change. And what is that? Yeah. I heard this great counselor one day. He was talking about trying to do marriage counseling with only one person in the marriage, which is very challenging. Not just challenging, it's impossible. And the reason it's impossible is because if you try to do marriage counseling with one person in the marriage, guess who they want to talk about? the other person, right? And there's a rule. We can't change a person unless they're sitting in the room. And so if they're not here, we can't change them. The only person we can change is ourselves. And that's bad news for everybody in here, isn't it? Because we didn't come here for us. We came here for somebody else. And I joke with my wife all the time, and I can say this because she's not here and she won't be mad at me for it. And, it's like you ever sit through a sermon, you're like, man, I wish so-and-so was here that sermon. Man, so-and-so should have been here. It's like we so quick to find out who needs that sermon besides us, right? And that's the way we are. And so today, we want to talk about this idea, lest we offend them. Before we can deal with the way other people offend us, we have to deal with how we offend others. And can I just tell you, if you were offended today, in all likelihood, you also offended someone else today. You might have offended them in traffic. Sometimes they let you know. Sometimes they don't, but it happens. You might have offended somebody at work or your spouse or your kids or whatever it might be. But we all are capable. Romans 14:13 says this, therefore, let us not judge one another anymore, but rather resolve this, not to put a stumbling block or a cause to fall in our brother's way. So it says, let's change our perspective. Let's stop doing what? Judging. What's judging? Determining what someone else needs to do. Right? That's all a judgment is. Like if you judge somebody else, all you're doing is deciding what they need to do. Sometimes we tell people our judgments because we say things like, hey, I know you didn't ask me, but I think what you need to do is, and that usually never goes well because there's nothing rejected as often as unsolicited advice. Right? If you ever find yourself saying, I know you didn't ask me, just don't talk anymore after that. This is not about to go well. So in Romans, Paul says, let's stop judging one another, but rather let's resolve to this. Let's worry about what we can control. Let's not put a stumbling block. This is an offense. Let's not give another person a reason to be offended. Jesus, we talked about this last week, offended some people by obeying his Father, but he never caused an offense in order to assert his own rights. And this is what gets us in trouble, right? We offend other people and we say to ourselves, it's okay because I'm within my rights. Like I'm justified. My perspective is right. Correct? Yes. We have those feelings. We see a passage in Matthew 17 where Jesus had the right to avoid paying a temple tax. This is in Matthew 17. It says this. When they had come to Capernaum. Now, Capernaum is I want you to understand this city. Capernaum was probably what we would call the headquarters of Jesus' ministry. Like, he was in Capernaum more often than any other time. It's actually in the general area of where he was from. And when he come to Capernaum, those who received the temple tax, which were the priests, they come to Peter and they said, does your teacher not pay the temple tax? So they're saying, does your leader, Jesus, pay the temple tax? Because he hasn't yet. Right? That's why they're asking. And Peter says, yes. And when he came into the house, Jesus anticipated him saying, what do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes? From their sons or from strangers? Now, I want you to see this. Peter says yes, and then he goes to Jesus to do what? No, he goes to ask him, do we pay the temple tax, right? Like, he actually says, you ever do this? He said yes to something that he really wasn't ready to commit to. Anybody been there, done that, rode that ride, got the t-shirt? And nothing offends somebody else like you committing to do something then having to uncommit, right? You ever say, yes, I will do something, then realize you can't do it? Yes. But you don't want to uncommit because you don't want to offend them, right? I remember one day I committed myself to do 2 weddings at the same time. Oh, this is a problem. I mean, this is somebody's wedding. You don't mess around with people's wedding. They stab you over that. Like, they will bury me. Like, literally. Like you go by the levee, there's an extra hump. You don't know why. It's my body under there. Right? I'm like, what am I going to do? Well, I find out one wedding is at the Ritz-Carlton at 6 on a Friday. And the other wedding is at the Audubon Country Club at 7. Now, you can Google map that. It's kind of hard to figure that out, you know? So I'm like, how am I going to get over this offense? So I had to, I went to the Ritz-Carlton for the rehearsal, and I talked to the valet, and I said, look, man, if I give you like $40, will you just leave my car running right here? I'm going to do this wedding, run out, jump in my car. This is a Ritz-Carlton, right? I drive a 2006 Toyota Highlander. So I go to the people with the first one, and I say, do you mind if we sign the marriage license before the wedding? They said, no, that's fine. We're doing a first look. I'm like, yes. First look is where the bride and the groom see each other before the wedding, and they take all their pictures. This is good news, because that means the bride and all the bridesmaids are already going to be ready. So I'm like, I think I can make this work. So I do the 6 o'clock wedding. I run out. I jump in the car. Valet hooks me up. It's hilarious because it's like a Lamborghini, a Ferrari, 2 Audis, and a Toyota Highlander sitting out in front by the valet because, you know, they put the nice cars out. I take off. I pull up at the Audubon Country Club just enough time while the processional's going down. I said, thank you, Jesus. You are Lord after all. And I saved my butt that day. But you don't want to live that way, do you? As soon as the setting whacking was over, I had the diarrhea. You know, I was all nervous the whole time. I'm being real. You've been here before, right? And that offended some of y'all. I'm sorry. I apologize. In Matthew 17, Peter says, Jesus asked Peter, well, what do you think? From whom do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes, from their sons or from strangers? What do you think? Like, who do we tax? The people that are our children, or do we tax somebody else's kids? Right? Somebody else's kids, right? Because what are we doing with our kids? We hooking them up, right? Yeah, that's what happens. Peter said to him, from strangers. And Jesus said to him, okay, well, then the sons are free, right? So what's Jesus thinking? Who's the son of who owns the temple? Jesus. So do I owe the temple tax, yes or no? No, I do not. Do I need to pay the temple tax? I don't think so. So for Jesus ends up deciding in Matthew 17:27, look, nevertheless, lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast in a hook, and take the fish that comes up first, and when you've opened its mouth, you'll find a piece of money. Take that and give it to them for me and for you. Now you think about this. Jesus says, even though I have the right not to pay the tax, even though that's my God-given right, I tell you what, we're going to pay it. Now, I want you to pay close attention. Jesus did not carry a wallet. Matter of fact, the Bible tells us that Jesus cared so much about money, he left Judas as the treasurer, Judas Iscariot, even though Judas was helping himself to the till, to the register, if you know what I mean. Putting a little cash in his pocket, everyone, but the Bible tells us that. And Jesus knew that, but Jesus really didn't care about money that much. Matter of fact, Jesus said, you know, we're going to pay the tax. Go fishing. The first fish you catch, open its mouth, it'll have money in it. Wow. Now, this is just a reminder that if you got financial problems, it's not really that big of a problem for God to solve. What he's looking for is faith and trust, because you can imagine Peter, he's thinking, that's the stupidest plan I ever heard of in my life. I mean, can you imagine, like, you come to church for, like, benevolence, hey, I need help paying the rent. Well, I want you to go fishing. Catch a fish, open its mouth, there's going to be a check inside made out to your landlord for the exact dollar amount. It's a ridiculous plan, right? But why did Jesus say, I'm going to pay it anyway? He said, nevertheless, lest we offend them. Now, there seems to be a discrepancy in Jesus' methods. Last week, we talked about all the different ways Jesus offended people, right? We talked about, he offended his mama. You remember that? She said, hey, tell Jesus his mother's outside and his brothers are outside. And Jesus said, well, who's my mother and my brother but the people sitting around me right now? Can you imagine who brought that message back to mama? Jesus said he don't know you. Roll out. Right? Jesus offended his own disciples. Jesus offended the Pharisees, the religious leaders. Yet here we go, Jesus is saying, no, I don't want to offend them. Isn't that a little bit of a problem for us? That's a little bit of a discrepancy, right? Well, let's look at Matthew 18, verses 1 through 4. It says, at that time, the disciples came to Jesus saying, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Then Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and said, assuredly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Now, we see Jesus referencing humility. Humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's just thinking of yourself less. It's putting someone else before you, putting someone else above you, serving someone else. We see in Matthew 20, he says, yet it shall not be among you. He says, in the world, the rulers lord it over one another. Whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus says, if you actually want to be great, it's not by making a lot of money. It's not by getting promoted or owning a big business. It's not by having nice possessions. If you actually want to have a significant life, it comes through serving someone else. It comes from humility. Now you think, right? Some of you, if you were Jesus and the temple priest came and said, well, you're going to pay the temple tax, you would have showed off that you were really the Son of God, wouldn't you? That would have been your right. This was Jesus's lawful right to do that. But he yielded his right with humility. And for us, that needs to be our perspective. Do we have the right to offend someone else? Sometimes we do. Sometimes it's within our rights. But we need to decide, do we want to yield to our rights or do we need to surrender them? Because that's really what being a Christian is. Really, to be a Christian, all it means is you yield all your rights and you accept all the responsibilities. That's all it is. Our attitude must be the same as Jesus Christ. He did not come to be served. He came to serve. He was the Son. He was free. He owed nobody anything. He was subject to no man, yet he chose to use his liberty and his freedom to serve other people. I heard an older pastor named Eugene Peterson speaking one time. I'll never forget it. And he was talking and he was teaching and he was just concluding a bunch of research that he had been doing. And his research showed that Jesus, up until the age of 30, some of you have wondered, well, what did he do between 12 and 30? The Bible's silent. Eugene Peterson's research, what he had studied was how Jesus was a carpenter. We know he followed in his father's trade. And all the carpenters of Nazareth at that time were in basically like a union, and they had worked together on one major project, and the major project was building the temple of Herod. So in all likelihood, Jesus spent his formidable years building the temple of a man. Think about how much humility that takes. Jesus is building his bed and his table and his furniture and his spacious rooms. And he's just serving. He's got humility. Because even though he had the right and the power and the authority and the means to tell them like it was, he chose to humble himself lest he would offend them. All of us as Christians are liberated. We're free. But according to the Bible, the reason we're liberated is to serve others. Galatians 5:13 says, for you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only don't use your liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love, serve one another. You've been called to liberty. Just don't use your liberty as an opportunity for the flesh. Boy, that's trouble right there, isn't it? Sometimes you got the right to say something, but you shouldn't say it because it's the flesh. How many of you know what I'm talking about? You've been there before, right? Ooh, you don't know what I want to say right now. I was meeting earlier this week with somebody I respect, and they were just telling me, they said, I had this meeting, and I really wanted to be in the flesh, but I did good the whole time, all the way to the end, but I really got in the flesh one time. That's a godly man. I just thought, man, that's so real. And then he told me how he wrote this letter. And it was 6 pages. And then he deleted it. And then he sent him the 1.5-page version, which was much nicer. Right? Because he just had to get it out, you know? But he said, I didn't send that because I know that it would offend them. We don't use our liberties to serve ourselves. See, here's the difference between a slave and a servant. A slave has to, a servant gets to. A slave does the minimum, a servant gives his maximum. A slave goes 1 mile, a servant goes the extra mile. A slave feels robbed, but a servant feels generous. A slave is bound, a servant is free. A slave fights for his rights, a servant lays down his rights. Now, these are biblical ideas. Like Jesus said, okay, if they demand your shirt, give them your cloak also. Like, they trying to steal your shirt, give them the cloak. Now you can't steal from me. I'm not robbed, I'm generous. They ask you to go 1 mile, you go an extra one. Because you got that attitude, that mindset. Now, here's the problem. You can be a servant, but have the attitude of a slave. Can't you? You ever do something nice for somebody, but you bitter the whole time you're doing it? Don't tell me I'm the only one. If you ever helped anybody move, you already know how this feels, right? Right? Like, you're doing the right thing, but the whole time you thinking, right? Like, you ever go to help somebody, but the plan is stupid? So the whole time you thinking, this is the stupidest plan ever. I can't believe we're doing this like this. I'm wasting my time out here. Right? Being a servant is not just about the action, it's about the attitude. It's about the perspective. 1 Corinthians 8:4, verses 6 and 7. Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is no other God but one. Yet for us there's one God, the Father, of whom all things, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom all are all things, and through him we live. However, there is not in everyone that knowledge. For some, with the consciousness of the idol until now, it is a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. Now here's what, I'll translate that into regular English for you, okay? Here's what he's saying. There are some believers at this time who thought that they couldn't get out of their mind that the meat they were eating might have been sacrificed to an idol, and they felt like they just couldn't bring themselves to do that. But there was a whole nother group of Christians who were like, man, I'm free from that mindset. I'm going to eat whatever I want. And so the Christians that felt free were just eating whatever they wanted in front of the people who were weaker. Now, they technically had the right to do that. Yes. They had the right to do that. But the Apostle Paul was challenging them that they were offending their brothers. And so even though they were free to do that, they should stop doing it so that they wouldn't offend those who were weaker. Yes, you have that freedom, but you should put aside that freedom for the sake of your brothers and sisters. Because we don't want you to offend them. Romans 14:13 and verse 17. Therefore, let us not judge one another anymore, but rather resolve not to put a stumbling block or to cause a fall in our brother's way. We read this earlier. For the kingdom of God is not about eating and drinking, but about righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Ghost. What he's saying is you're missing out on righteousness, peace, and joy so that you can cling to this right that you have. Because once you start offending people, do you have peace anymore? No. Do you have righteousness before their eyes? No. You miss out on the joy because now you're so caught up in the argument, the quarrel, the disagreement. 1 Corinthians 8:11 and 12. Because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish, but for whom Christ died. But when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Now this is interesting. He says, actually, when you offend them, it's really Jesus that you're sinning against, not them. That's how important it is to put aside your rights in certain situations. We all need to lay down our rights. Matthew 18. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and he would drown in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of offenses. For offenses must come, but woe to the man by whom the offense comes. If your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. It's better for you to enter into life lame or maimed rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet and to be cast in the everlasting fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. It's better for you to enter into life with 1 eye rather than having 2 eyes and be cast in the hellfire. Take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I say to you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. Now here's interesting. He says, look, be careful and watch out for those of you who offend the little children. Now, was he talking about physical children? No. He was talking about spiritual children, the newbies. Be careful for the ones who use their liberty to offend the young ones. Matter of fact, it would be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and be thrown into the ocean and drowned to death than to offend one of these little ones of mine. Then he says, look, if your hand causes you to sin, what should you do? Cut it off. Now that's kind of drastic, don't you think? Right? If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. It's better to have 1 eye, no depth perception, than to go to hell with 2 good eyes, 2 good hands. Now think about this. He says that's how you should deal with the attitude that it's okay to offend someone else. Is it okay to offend someone else in order to cling to your rights? No. And when you start to have that feeling, what do you need to do? Repent. Cut it off. Cut it out. Do everything you can to get rid of it because it's dangerous. 1 Corinthians 8:9. But beware lest somehow this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block to those who are weak. Now, let me give you an example of what this looks like. I remember my wife was telling me how she went on a mission trip to Africa. And she called me from Africa, and she was telling me about some things that happened. And she said one of the things that happened is that they were in like a room, the room she was in, and I can't remember all the details, but like the room didn't have hot water or running water or something like that. So the people that were hosting her said, well, look, we're going to trade rooms. We're going to take the room with the no running water. You take the room that we're in. My wife or her sister, I don't remember exactly all the details of the story, said, no, we don't want that room. We want y'all to stay where y'all are at. And their hosts got what? Offended. Now, you don't realize it, but there's nothing that offends people as much as offered hospitality that's rejected. Isn't that true? Yes. I remember a missionary who told me this particular missionary, a very strong belief that he shouldn't consume alcohol at all. And so he's a missionary in Mongolia, and he goes and sits down with the particular chief of the tribe he was trying to share the gospel with. And so the chief of the tribe brings out fermented goat's milk, which is a delicacy in their part of the world. Matter of fact, if you offer somebody the fermented goat's milk, you really love them. They're an honored guest in your land. That's like making filet mignon for them around here. I know some of y'all are grossed out a little bit, but I'm telling you, that's how it is, right? Now, fermented goat's milk is very strong alcohol. It's very strong. And so he offers him this glass of goat's milk. Now, here he is. He's got a problem. In his conscience, he believes it's wrong for him to consume alcohol. But he's sitting with this alcohol that's been offered to him by the chief of this tribe. So if he offends this chief, his chance to minister to this tribe is over with. So what does he do? Now, this is what he did. This is what he decided to do. He received the drink and he said, thank you. And throughout their conversation, he would take the drink, he would put it to his lips, do like this, but he wouldn't actually sip it. He would just let it hit his lips and go back in the cup. The cup never got lower, so they never offered to refill it. They felt respected by him. He was able to maintain his conscience. But let me ask you this. Was it his right to say, no, I don't drink alcohol? Yes, that was his right. Was that his freedom? Yes, it was. But he chose to put aside his rights in order not to offend. Okay? So, let's say you're driving. And somebody cuts you off. Now, did you have the right to the space you were in? Yes, you did. Right? Yes, you did. Let's say it's like right there on I-10 by the veterans exit. And you waiting in the long line. And somebody tries to drive up at the last minute and sneak in. And you like, no, this ain't happening today. You picked the wrong one, sucker. Do you have the right to where you're at? Yeah, absolutely. Let's say they cut you off. Let's say they do that. Do you have the right to let them know? Hey, you can do that in a godly way. Like 2 quick honks is godly, but if you lay on it for 3.5 minutes, that's not so much, right? You know? Here's the deal. If you tell them something, what are they going to be? Offended. Offended. Let's say you got somebody in your family, you know, who's making really bad financial decisions, but then asking everybody for money. Or let's say they just ask everybody for money, but then when they get it, they go to the casino. Yes, I said casino. Like the treasure chest. Right? Do you have the right to let them know what's up? What if it's your money you gave them? You got the right? Now, can you tell them in a way that won't be offensive? Yeah, probably. Is that how you're going to be tempted to tell them? No, not at all. Let's say Sam loans me his car for a week while he's out of town. When he gives it to me, it's on a full gas tank. What's the proper way for me to return it? Let's say I give it back to him on the light. Now, let's be honest. How many of you going to be offended by that, right? Yeah. So what you going to say? Yeah. Now, there's 2 different ways you can say it, right? There's one way that's non-offensive, and there's another way that is offensive. Sometimes you just choose not to say anything. Some of you would do something like, well, I ain't going to say nothing. But then you text me like, where you at? Because I'm at the gas station. You got that subtle offense technique, right? It's like that quarterback sneak offense. You know? People like that. Right? I'm just going to slide it in there. See what happens. But here's the question you got to ask yourself. As a Christian, what rights do you need to let go of and what rights do you need to hold on to? Now, all I'm asking you to do is to seek God's will in each and every situation. Really dig deep and say, okay, is this a right I need to cling to, or is this something I just need to let go of? You know, we all have to make that choice. In my marriage with my wife, both of us have to make that decision. If we try to cling to every right, each one of us, do you know what we have? Chaos. A miserable life. And people don't live miserable lives for a long time. They used to do that. They don't do it no more. Can't live miserable forever. Nobody can. But you can change. See, the misbelief is that, well, if I'm in a miserable situation, it's just got to stay miserable. No, not necessarily. Sometimes it does, because the other person you're with, they just want to be miserable. But the ideal is to change the situation. The question you got to ask yourself is what I'm about to say going to pass the edification test? Now, to edify means to build somebody up versus to tear somebody down. Romans 14:19, therefore let us pursue the things which make for peace and the things by which one may edify another. 1 Corinthians 10:23 through 24. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. 1 Corinthians 10:31 to 33. Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all for the glory of God. Verse 32, give no what? Offense. Either to the Jews or the Greeks or the church of God. Just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they might be saved. Most importantly, 2 Corinthians 6:3. We give no offense in anything, that our ministry may not be blamed. So here's what I want you to really focus on this week. How often do you dish out offenses? How often do you pass them out? Now, you got a stack of them because you like everybody else. You can choose to pass those things out, or you can choose to yield the right to do so. Now, you know when you say something that is to offend someone else. How many of you know when you have that feeling, right? Can I just tell you, when you're about to say the wrong thing, it's usually preceded by a feeling that sounds like this. Ooh. About to let them know. You usually hold yourself back for a few minutes. You say like, Lord, I hope they walk off and stop talking right now. Because if they say one more thing, I'm about to let them know. Am I the only pastor that's ever had that feeling? Am I the only person? Am I the only one up here today? I had that feeling 2 hours ago. Shoot. Here's the reality. When you have that feeling, it's time for you to ask yourself, is what I'm about to say going to edify or offend? Is it going to build up or tear down? There's ways to say everything in an edifying way. And you got to search your soul to make sure you figure out how to do that. If you cling to your rights, it's not going to work real well for you. Jesus didn't do that, and neither do we. You got to release your rights. Sometimes not say anything. Sometimes the choice is, you know what, I don't think I can say this in an edifying way. So it's probably best if I just don't say it at all. But you have to deal with the fact that you've been offended by them. Because if you don't, it's just going to simmer and build up, and you're going to try to keep stiff arm and passing those offenses out, but eventually you're going to throw the whole deck at somebody. Because some of you have been there, right? You've held your tongue and held your tongue and held your tongue, and then you unleashed every tongue lashing you've been holding for the last 3 years. That's not good either. So next week, we're going to talk about how do you forgive an offense? How do you really get down to it? What does forgiveness really look like? Now, I'm going to tell you. The people you think you've forgiven, you probably haven't. I'm going to tell you that straight up. There are people in your life that say, I definitely have forgiven them. No, you probably haven't. This is how you know when you've really forgiven a person. When they've harmed you and when they walk up and you don't think about that harm. That's when you're really clear. That's when you're really free. Now, I'm going to tell you, there's people in my life I've been forgiven, working on the forgiveness thing for 15 years. It ain't free yet. This past sermon, we talked about forgiveness. I got 2 people in my life, God spoke to me and said, you haven't forgiven those 2 people. And he was right. I'm working on that now. Just when you get the forgiveness slate clean, God sends you someone else. If you're lucky. If you're unlucky, he sends you the same old person. And they offend you again. So what we need to talk about is, how do you really dig deep? Dig deep and get forgiveness. Okay?